Hey guys, this is Miss Smith. I'm going to go through the World War I review worksheet with you, so follow along with me and fill yours in as we go through it. All right, so at the top, you see long-term causes of World War I. So we're using the acronym MAIN to help you remember what these causes are. So if you look right here, we have a blank next to each of the letters. If I look right here, it already has the words I'm going to need and what they mean. So for M, I know I'm going to write militarism. For A, I'm going to write alliances. For I, we're going with imperialism. And N is going to be nationalism. All right, so if we look at these four in the glossary, for militarism, it says building up armies, getting ready for war. For alliances, we have agreements or promises to help another country. For imperialism, building up of empires. And then nationalism, having pride in and love for your country, willing to defend it, or patriotism. All right, so now we're going to do a little practice with these words we just looked at. So the first one says, Germany wished to build up her empire. This is known as blank. So if I refer back to this glossary up here, the one that talks about building an empire, it's going to be imperialism. All right, Germany also wanted to build up her armed forces. This is known as blank. All right, so which one talks about building up an army? That one is going to be militarism. All right, our second one. Britain made friendship agreements with Russia and France. These are called blank. So which of these words talks about making an agreement with someone? All right, that one's going to be alliances. And our last one, blank shows you are proud of your country and want it to be the best. So I know based on these definitions that the word I'm going to need in this blank is nationalism. All right, so let's look at the bottom half of this worksheet. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to read this with you. So make sure you are following along. We will need this information in order to answer these questions at the bottom. The two major alliances that fought in World War I were the Allied powers, which we see in parentheses is Great Britain, Russia, France, Serbia, and Belgium. And then we also have the Central Powers, which would be Germany, Austria-Hungary, Bulgaria, and Turkey. On June 24th, Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary was assassinated, and Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. The fighting began in Europe. By the summer of 1914, every major country in Europe was in the war, and the fighting was fierce. Because of its policy of isolationism, the U.S. stayed out of the war, but in 1915, a German submarine sank the British steamship the Lusitania, killing more than 100 U.S. citizens. Then, in 1917, the Zimmermann Note exposed Germany's plan to get Mexico to enter the war on its side. President Wilson asked Congress to declare war on the Central Powers. After joining the war effort, the U.S. drafted 4 million men and was sending thousands of men to France every day. The U.S. Navy sent battleships to help the British, U.S. Marines to France, and supplies to Europe, all in an effort to beat the Central Powers. America provided the help needed to win the war. In the fall of 1918, the Central Powers surrendered to the Allies. World War I was over. Peace negotiations were complete between Germany and the Allied nations when the Treaty of Versailles was signed. The treaty punished Germany harshly. Germany had to give up many of its territories, pay large amounts of money to countries hurt by the war, and agree not to rebuild a strong military. The League of Nations was formed, and countries agreed to settle their differences peacefully in the future and to avoid war at all costs. No one wanted to experience another world at war. All right, so let's look at question number 1. It says, list the 2 major alliances that fought in World War I. So if I look back into the text, I see that very first sentence. It says the 2 major alliances that fought in World War I were the Allied powers and the Central powers. So I'm going to go ahead and write that down for number 1. So Allied powers and Central powers. All right, question number 2. What event caused the fighting to begin in Europe? So let's look back to our text. I see this sentence right here that says the fighting began in Europe. So if I look right before that, I'm going to highlight this sentence right here. So I'm going to say the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. All right, number 3. What 2 events caused the U.S. to enter the war? So again, we need to look back to the text. So I know that this paragraph right here is talking about the U.S. starting to join the war. So before the U.S. joined, we know that they had a policy of isolationism, which meant that they were not going to get involved. However, I see right here, but in 1915, a German submarine sank the British steamship, the Lusitania. So I'm going to highlight that. So I know that's going to end up being one of my events. So then I also see in the next sentence, then in 1917, the Zimmermann Note exposed Germany's plan to get Mexico to enter the war on its side. So I'm also going to highlight the Zimmermann Note. So I'm going to write the sinking of the Lusitania, and I'm going to write Zimmermann Note. All right, number 4. How did the U.S. help? All right, so if I look at paragraph number 3, it says, after joining the war effort, the U.S. drafted 4 million men and was sending thousands of men to France every day. The U.S. Navy sent battleships to help the British, U.S. Marines to France, and supplies to Europe. So this whole little section right here talks about the different ways that the U.S. helped. So I'm going to shorten it, and I'm going to say they drafted men for war. I'm going to say they sent battleships. And I'm also going to say that they sent supplies. All right, and we are at number 5. The blank was the official end of the war. So if we're talking about the ending of the war, I'm going to go ahead and look towards the end of the text. If I look at that very first sentence, it says peace negotiations were complete between Germany and the Allied nations when the Treaty of Versailles was signed. So that right there is what I'm going to choose to put for this answer. The Treaty of Versailles. Because we know once this was signed, that was the official ending of the war. Germany had to make all of these repercussions for the damage they had caused throughout the war.